Warning: this podcast features adult subject matter, adult language, and things not meant for children to hear. Viewer discretion is advised. You've been warned. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 2 of I'm No Joe. I'm your host, The Meter. I'd like to start off by thanking our wonderful sponsors, but we don't have any yet. So let's just dive right into it. So the first thing I would like to do starting off here is give a quick rundown, a quick recap of what went down last night in the Ultimate Fighter 27 finale. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the UFC Fight Pass prelims because neither one of those fights were really remarkable, really worth talking about. Both of those fights were really, really mediocre, and I don't really feel like the card needed those. So we'll jump right into the FS1 prelims here. The first fight, the first one we're going to talk about here, is going to be Dustin Diamond versus Bryce Mitchell. Now, it was a great fight, but Bryce Mitchell was just putting the work in the early rounds. Round 3, Diamond definitely put an ass whooping down, but it wasn't enough. They gave it to Bryce Mitchell in the end, and I was really happy because he did definitely work his ass off, and he definitely earned that. The next fight, the fight after that, John Gunther versus Alan Zuniga from Costa Rica. Now, even though this went to the judge's decision and they did ultimately give it to John Gunther, I think this fight is a perfect example to show that not everyone that makes it through the Ultimate Fighter is ready for a UFC contract. Both of those guys look very amateurish, very rookie-ish in that ring, even through the third round. And granted, they did give it to Gunther, but I don't really feel like either one of those gentlemen are ready for that big spotlight performance. And that's a little surprising to me because during the actual Ultimate Fighter season, Alan Zuniga looked a lot better than he seemed to in that fight. I don't know if it's just the bright lights that got to him or what, but I think both of those gentlemen still need a whole lot more time before they ever get considered for another shot in the main spotlight of the UFC. Now, the next fight we got to talk about here, Luis Violent Bob Ross Pena versus Richie the SBG beat up doll Smullen. Now, Pena really did look great in that fight, start to finish. And it kind of makes you wonder if he wouldn't have broken his foot during the actual show, if he might not have been one of the ones competing for the finale of the Ultimate Fighter here. Now, Richie Smullen, on the other hand, is one of the quote-unquote up-and-comers from SBG Ireland, but it really seemed more like he was just, I'd say, the SBG punching bag at this point. Pena, not to take anything away from Pena because he looked spectacular, but Smullen just looked out of sorts. He looked like he wasn't prepared, like he didn't know what he was doing here, like he just wasn't ready for that spotlight. Like he's the guy at SBG that they just beat on when they need practice. And he says that he's trained with McGregor multiple times, but I can't see how he would stand in the ring with McGregor for more than 20 seconds with a performance like that. Now, props to Pena. I do believe we're going to see that gentleman again very soon in the main spotlight, but the fight itself just, I don't know, man. It seemed like a weird one. But moving along, now, this fight was highly anticipated because there was a lot of Hawaiian love in the building, and Ostrovich is, one of those Hawaiian proud girls that she's coming to represent her hometown. But De La Rosa surprised everyone and put that submission in so smoothly. She at one point had the neck, let go, re-cinched it, and when she cinched it up the second time, you saw it go in like a needle and thread. It just went right through, and it was the beginning of the end. Props to her. I'm sure we're going to see both of those ladies again very soon. That, in my opinion, was fight of the night. Those two girls went at it harder than any of the guys in any of the matches that fought. That, in my opinion, should have been fight of the night. But we'll move forward. We're talking about the main card now. The opening for the main card, Chirico, however they pronounce it, versus Marquez. Now, to me, this was a very good preliminary example of what the main card was going to, or the main fight was going to be, rather. The size difference, the style difference between these two gentlemen reflected very much to me of Adesanya versus Tavares. And the outcome was very similar as well. And as I was watching the fight, I turned to my wife and I said, this looks a lot like what the main event's going to be. We've got a bigger, more aggressive man in Marquez here versus the more nimble, the more lean, the longer fighter in DiCirico, however you say his name. But I can't believe the fight lasted as long as it did, because you could tell clearly that Marquez was just pushing forward and pushing forward and pushing forward. And it didn't work, man. It didn't work. I'll give him props. It went to the end, but that bite down in the mouthpiece and just push forward style, it's not working anymore. You've got to have more tricks in your bag. That being said, we move on to one of the most unique fights, a 7-year in the making rematch of Ultimate Fighter ladies who are both pushing 40. Now, this was the opposite of the fight with the ladies from earlier. This was not a knockdown, drag out, bang them up, throwing everything into the wind and just slap boxing the hell out of each other. Submission was the main focus for most of this fight. You could tell that both of these ladies were a little bit older. They were a little bit more experienced. Neither one of them came out firing from the hip. It was almost a boring fight to the extent that they were both, I will say that they were showing each other respect, but it just dragged out and seemed like neither one really wanted to commit. And I honestly wouldn't be mad at not seeing either one of those ladies back in the octagon anytime soon. But speaking of people I don't want to see in the octagon again anytime soon, if you guys listen to episode 1, you already know how I feel about this one. Now, I will say this. Bruce Leroy won the fight. Caceres left with the W at the end of the night, but that puts him at 14-11 with one of the most lackluster performances I can recall seeing in recent times. That dude is a bad joke. Granted, Bravo is brand new. I think they said he's just turned 23, 22 or 23. Like, he's still super green, super fresh behind the ears. But Caceres is beyond meh. Like, he's beyond lackluster, in my opinion. He's got a horrible record. He's got a horrible style. He's got horrible drive in his fighting technique. I just don't understand why the UFC keeps a guy like that around on the payroll. I really, really honestly would be much happier to see that dude cut and sent down the damn road packing. But Daddy Dana likes to keep his roster full, so it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. So we'll move on to the next one here. The first of the actual Ultimate Fighter challenges. Jay Cuccinella versus Brad Superman Katona. This was one of the wild card style fights that I have been saying for a while I couldn't really pick. Jay Cuccinella is tough as nails, but Brad Katona is not to be overlooked. The dude seems like that Clark Kent role when he's got his glasses on and he's walking around talking engineer talk, being a super nerd, and then he's one of those like the original Joe says, he's a nerd assassin. He's got a day job where he doesn't seem imposing, and then he takes those spectacles off and he gets down on the jiu-jitsu mat at SBG Ireland as well and just gets after it. He and John Kavanaugh, through the intros in the embedded series that you could see their interactions, they both have very similar mental styles. They both logically like to think everything out. So, you got to watch out for that kid. Not only did he just become the Ultimate Fighter for his weight division, but that kid has good style. He's got pretty good reaction. Like, he's going to go a long way. I don't know if he's going straight to the top, but the kid has a damn bright future. Cuccinello, on the other hand, that dude is tough as nails. And he says it himself. He's not the most technical fighter, but damn if that dude is not just all heart. You hear his story. You hear the things he's been through. And the man has lived through hell. And for him to still be able to get up and just put 100% of his drive into being a fighter the way he does, my hat is off to you, sir. You are a badass. You might not have won that fight, but I have no doubt in my mind that Jay Cuccinella will be back in the UFC octagon very, very soon. Now, that being said, let's move on to the lightweight final. Mike the Lone Wolf Chisano versus Joe Skeletor Giannetti. Boston versus Jersey, city boy versus country boy. This was one hell of a matchup waiting to happen. Now, I'm not going to toot my own horn too damn much, but when these guys were just getting their pre-fight stories shown and their walkouts ready, I turned to my wife and I said, I don't see anywhere this fight can go that Giannetti is going to beat Trizano. I think Trizano just has that much of a level above him as far as striking, as far as ground game goes. I know we saw, Giannetti throw some real good jiu-jitsu out during the show, but I didn't see anything that indicated that Trizano wasn't ready for it from what I saw of him. And sure enough, as we watched the fight go on, Giannetti just wasn't taking it serious enough. You could tell from the beginning of the fight, in his head, he already won it, and it seemed like he was almost insulted that he had to fight to get the trophy. And Trizano was the total opposite. Trizano showed up, turned on, and was ready to kick ass and take names from bell one until the end of the fight, however that might have came. That, in my opinion, is one of the main reasons why Trizano won that fight, won the Ultimate Fighter undefeated, and is going to be a serious problem for a lot of people real quick in the UFC rankings. That dude is a badass, and my hat is definitely off to him. But the main event, the highlight of the evening, the place that a few years ago Brad Tavares had his entry to the UFC fight, the Palms, this time he's back as the main event headliner versus Israel, the last stylebender Adesanya. Now, if you listen to episode 1, there were rumors that Adesanya was hurt coming into this fight, and that had me honestly a little nervous because Adesanya is good, but any fighter injured makes them a problem. They could go hardcore and hurt themselves too early, or they just might not have the power and technique and speed that made them who they are and got them where they are today. As soon as that fight started, we learned that this was not the case. The stylebender showed up. He was on point. He was ready to go. He was kicking ass and taking name from the very beginning. Now, I will say one of the descriptions that Jimmy Smith and the other gentleman whose name I forget because he's not a regular announcer used, one of the terms that they used to describe his style is that he's very efficient with his movement. And that is a great analogy because I was actually explaining to my wife because she was asking about the fighters how precise and how exact the striking of Adesanya is. Now, granted, Tavares is no slouch in any way, shape, or form. That man has hands like fucking semi-trucks. He hits like a ton of bricks. He's quick, he's strong, and he's aggressive. So he generally tends to put it the fuck on fighters. But like we saw in the earlier fight with Di Chirico and Marquez, or however you say it, sometimes the dude with the better precision, the leaner dude, the quicker dude gets in there and does the work. And Adesanya picked Tavares apart. Just put on a class of how not to react to a dude who's a kickboxer. And in the opening, when Tavares actually talked a little shit and said, there's nowhere this fight can go that Adesanya's better than me. If I want to kickbox with him, I'm going to kickbox with him and I'll be better. And as soon as I heard that, I started laughing out loud because Adesanya is a world-class kickboxer. 79 professional kickboxing fights, 29 of those ended by knockout. That's not the record of someone to be taken lightly and somebody to talk shit to when you're not a kickboxer. You're a wrestler. You're a striker. Why would you cross over into somebody's discipline like that and talk shit? And this is a perfect example because it almost looked like Adesanya was round by round, switching up the way that he was kicking Tavares' ass. He start with some kicks. The next round, it was punches. Third round, you saw the elbows come out, and he just sliced Tavares up. That cut over the eye, oh my God. You could almost see him aiming to cut him when he started throwing the elbows, and it worked like a charm. He sliced Tavares' face open like a razor blade, and even after the first round, they had to bring that end swell in there and put it all over Brad's face because Tavares was just lighting him up. By the end of the match, the knee of Tavares was just purple because Adesanya kept throwing that sneaky low kick and dropping it on him. And it's one of those things that might have only been his third fight in the UFC, but Adesanya just took out a dude in the top 10. I mean, Brett Tavares was ranked number 8 going into the fight, and Adesanya made easy work of him in short order. And he did it beautifully, masterfully, and patiently. He waited it out. He never rushed. He never got sloppy. Everything was calculated and precise. This dude is going to be a serious, serious problem for people in the middleweight division going forward. So, that concludes our Ultimate Fighter finale recap. Excuse me, let me take a little drink here. Take a sip of some water. Now, let's talk about the upcoming UFC 226. Tonight's the big night. I'm going to try and get both the audio and video version of this episode up and ready for broadcast for publishing before the fight itself goes live. We might just get the audio version, but I'm going to try my ass to get both of them. So the first thing that I want to talk about here, Uriah Hall. Is he going to be ready? Is he going to be okay? Uriah Hall had a heart attack and a seizure during his weight cut in January. They almost didn't let him come back to fighting because that's not right. Like, that shows that dude is cutting so much weight. He's depriving his body of the basics. That's not a good thing. That's not a good thing by any stretch of the imagination. And it's not something to brag about. It's not something to, say, well, I survived. You barely survived. So I'm worried about him because he's a great fighter. But if you're cutting that hard, that might have some serious long-term effects. And on the other side of the octagon against him, Paulo Costa, that dude, there's rumors about that dude enjoying his quote-unquote Mexican supplements, his alternative enhancement vitamins, if you will. But he hasn't been caught. But if you look at that dude, come on. That dude is ridiculous. So that fight alone, they're going to kick off and end the prelim card with that fight. And it's, I don't know, man. I don't know. That being said, let's move on to the main card. Now, the big thing that we have to address right away when we're talking about the main card, Brian T. City Ortega and Max Holloway is officially off the card. Max Holloway suffered from concussion symptoms early this weekend and ended up actually having to be hospitalized for it. They finally pulled him out. They officially pulled him off the card. They sent people to talk to Ortega, and his coach, Henner Gracie, said, and I quote, "If it's not another title fight, Brian's not interested." So instead of looking for another replacement, they just pulled that whole fight off the card. They made Ngannou versus Lewis the co-main event. Now, let's talk about that one. Ngannou versus Lewis being pushed to the main event. Now, push is an ironic term if you saw the weigh-ins, because when they got to the weigh-ins, there was a little shoving early on, like tends to happen sometimes with the big guys. But then when they got close, when they did the actual full-on, weigh-in stare-down, there was a giant shoving match that almost turned into a little bit of a scrum. You could see Dana White was clearly a little worried. So there is obviously some bad blood between these two gentlemen. Derek Lewis has been saying that this is the fight that everyone wanted to see. And no, it's not. Derek Lewis has really kind of fallen to the wayside in the heavyweight division. He's been out for a while with some injuries. He was out talking smack on social media. He isn't in everyone's scope anymore. Ngannou, on the other hand, coming off that loss to Stipe, but not a terrible loss, a serious ass whooping, but not a terrible loss to Stipe. Ngannou's still fresh in everyone's mind, and in my opinion, at least, if Ngannou can put it down on Derek Lewis and just shut him up and put him to sleep, that puts Ngannou right back up on the top prospects. And like they showed on the Embedded, Ngannou and Stipe are having a real casual back and forth. They're talking, they're being very cordial, and even Ngannou says it seems odd to him how Stipe can be so nice after they just fought. And then Ngannou says it was a good fight, by the way, but he's looking forward to the rematch. And realistically, you got to think if Ngannou makes light work of Lewis, which I think there's a good chance that he could do, I really don't see a lot of reasons why you wouldn't give Stipe versus Ngannou another shot, because that's a great fight if Ngannou has learned. We'll see tonight if he has or not. But the other side of that is, if you watch the Embedded, you got to see backstage before the weigh-ins, or before the press conference, rather, DC and Derek Lewis are having a little conversation, and they're talking about how Derek Lewis beat DC's record on the striking machine. DC's giving Lewis shit. Lewis is giving DC shit, back and forth. And next thing you know, Lewis says to DC, if you beat Stipe and I beat Francis, I'm going to show you how hard I punch. And DC says, you and me? And Lewis says, if you got that strap, then you're the one that I'm coming after I get around Ngannou. So Lewis, in his mind, as far as I can tell, is already looking past this fight. And looking past Francis Ngannou is a dangerous mistake to make for anyone. And I mean anyone. Stipe didn't take him lightly. Overeem did. Look at the difference in those two fights. Overeem got sent into orbit. Stipe put the work in, put it down, and showed him what a true champion does. I don't know if Lewis is going to be able to put it on him the way that Stipe did. And I think that Ngannou, to his credit, has learned a lot from that fight and changed his style up. I think Lewis is going to be in trouble. I think it's not going to be a very long fight. I don't see this fight making it to the second round. And if it does, I don't see it making it past. I'm calling this one. I think Ngannou is going to take it. I think he's going to send Lewis to Night Land. But the big thing, if you've watched the Embedded, if you watch the Road to the Octagon, if you follow the social media, DC keeps saying this one catchphrase, my legacy is all that matters. I'm doing this for my legacy. If I win this, I hold 2 belts. That's my legacy. And then you see Stipe doing the same press, and Stipe keeps saying the counter to that. Legacy doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the next fight. This is my next fight, so this is what I'm focused on. And I think that says a lot about how this event's going to unfold. I think Stipe is watching for this fight. He's not worried about what's next. He's literally worried about what's in front of him right now. And I think, like he said, John's belt holder is just overlooking this fight unto itself. He's trying to envision himself as the heavyweight and the light heavyweight champion. And I think in doing so, he has overlooked a lot of what is making Stipe and what made Stipe the greatest heavyweight the UFC has ever seen. His wrestling is top-notch. His striking is top-notch. His jiu-jitsu is top-notch. His cardio, his endurance is top-notch. Now, I understand that John's belt holder has been training with Kane for all these years, and Kane previously was the baddest heavyweight the UFC had ever seen. But that time has passed. Kane is still a great athlete, and you can see it in his coaching. He's still very strong, and he's back to moving, and he's striking, and he's doing good. But Kane's time in the spotlight is over. I don't think there is a single chance in hell that Kane can come back and take that belt away from Stipe. I think this is Stipe's world now, and I think that DC is getting delusional in thinking that because he's training with Kane and Kane used to be the greatest, that Stipe's not anything he has to worry about. And I think DC, much like the UFC ran the video game UFC 3 version of the fight like they always do, I think much like that prediction, I think Stipe puts DC out. I don't know if it's going to make it to the third round like it did in the game, but I think DC goes to sleep. I think this ends poorly for him. I would love to see a submission, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's just going to be a good night moment, and I think DC is going to bed. So, that being said, I think we're going to see a lot of this again at the end of tonight. I think this is going to be a similar scene that everyone gets a glance at, and I think everybody knows how that goes down. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I would like to take a moment to thank you all for tuning in with us. Your patience with this and your following through is much appreciated indeed. So we're going to call that all for this episode. This has been I'm No Joe, and remember, don't let ignorance stop you. You can root for anyone. Have a great time.